Hello, everyone. My name is Carla G, and welcome to the James Lindsay Remix channel, where I bring James Lindsay's podcast to life with pictures in 10 minutes. In this video, I will be covering all 4 of the Groomer Schools videos. But I saw that Groomer Schools 5 came out this morning, but I will do a separate video on that one. Groomer Schools 1, The Long Cultural Marxist History of Sex Education. You must understand that sexualizing kids in school is not a new idea, but is part of the 100-year Marxist program to destabilize kids, destroy families, separate kids from their parents, and hence, destroy the culture. The architects of these theories were Antonio Gramsci and George Lukács. As you may have noticed, when traveling down the Marxist rabbit hole, James Lindsay frequently references Antonio Gramsci, George Lukács, Herbert Marcuse, and Paulo Freire as the progenitors of modern Marxist thought, to which I have come to call them the Marxist usual suspects. Anyway, Gramsci was a Marxist and founding member of the Italian Communist Party. He influenced the Frankfurt School in Germany, which was associated with the Institute for Social Research, where other famous theorists of that time found a home, like Herbert Marcuse, Karl Marx, Immanuel Kant, Wilhelm Hegel, Sigmund Freud, and Max Weber. Gramsci theorized that the Marxists needed to not only go into the cultural institutions and destabilize them from within, but to dismantle and destroy the traditional nuclear family. The severing of the generations and turning the young against the old would be a surefire way to abolish the cultural hegemony that dominated the so-called oppressed. In 1919, George Lukács tapped into the idea that sexuality was an extremely powerful force and that tapping into those powerful sexual urges will break the bond between child and parent. Which is really like, Mom, you don't understand me, on steroids. And thus, Lukács' compulsory sex education was implemented in schools, aimed to diminish traditional Christian values and to get rid of old habits and ideas. The combination of Lukács' and Gramsci's ideas were meant to hit like a 1-2 punch aimed at the dominant Christian values of the time. Parents at the time were enraged and were not having any of this inflicted on their kids, and Lukács' compulsory sex education only lasted about 4 months. Thank God. But that wasn't the end of the plan. Mao Zedong will expand on this idea of using kids in his Red Guard, as Lindsay will discuss in Groomer Schools 3. Groomer Schools 2, Queer Futurity and the Sexual Abuse of Your Children. James Lindsay reads an entire paper from Hannah Dyer, an assistant professor of child and youth studies at Brock University in Ontario, Canada, entitled Queer Futurity and Childhood Innocence, Beyond the Injury of Development. To sum up Dyer's paper, the goal is to turn child education into queer studies. Dyer's paper hones in on childhood innocence as the thing that needs to be destroyed in order to reform the child and in turn society. To Dyer, childhood innocence is socially constructed and false and has to be taken apart by critical theory methods. Childhood innocence upholds power dynamics and cultural hegemony, which means that heteronormativity must be replaced with queerness. Dyer is challenging early childhood development with the process of sexualizing children to generate alienation and to cultivate queer affects like hate and aggression. Your kids are being taught hate and aggression, which is a Maoist program, which you'll learn about in Groomer Schools 3. There is no clearer revelation of psychological warfare than a statement like this. Sexualizing your kids is bad enough, but I want to highlight the objectification that is taking place. The left doesn't see your kids as people. They see them as pawns and a means to an end. Your kids are only tools the left uses to achieve communist utopia. What comes to my mind is the saying, "You cannot make an omelet without breaking eggs," by Robert Louis Stevenson. The eggs being your kids' psyches, and the omelet is the communist utopia. Groomer Schools 3, the creation of an American Red Guard. During Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, he established what was called the Red Guard. Red meaning communist. The Red Guard was in operation from 1966 to 1968 and was a student-led paramilitary organization meant to destroy the Chinese culture that predated Mao's rule. Mao wanted to wipe out what he called the four olds: habits, culture, customs, and ways of thinking. Mao separated the Chinese people into two groups, the red and the black. Any group considered red had Mao's stamp of communist approval. Any person deemed in the black group was considered an enemy of the Chinese Communist Party. Why is this relevant? Because Mao built off Lukács's and Gramsci's plan to destroy cultural hegemony, using the same two objectives. 1, to destabilize kids, and 2, to separate kids from their parents and society. Currently, the queer theorists have adopted this strategy using the same two objectives, but instead of separating kids into red and black groups, they are teaching kids to adopt a gender or sexual identity that alienates them from their parents, which will separate this generation from their elders and from society's cultural hegemony of heteronormativity. In Maoist terms, those who identify with gender identities like transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, whatever, is equivalent to the Communist Party-approved red group. On the other hand, the critical race theorists are targeting people by race and scapegoating white people, or what they call whiteness. Paraphrasing Lindsay here, since white is the dominant culture, their white identity is taboo, and it's uncool being white. If white doesn't have social cash, then they have to adopt an identity that does, with social cash, like transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, or even a mental illness, and then try to live up to these roles. White people in Maoist terms would be in the black group. White kids can now adopt whatever gender or sexual identity that's cool and socially approved, and now be in the equivalent of the red group, or part of the Red Guard, so to speak. We are reproducing Maoism in our schools and in the culture, using your kids. Groomer Schools 4, Drag Queen Story Hour. In Groomer Schools 4, James Lindsay reads the entire paper entitled Drag Pedagogy, the Playful Practice of Queer Imagination in Early Childhood by Harper Keenan and Lil Miss Hot Mess, a drag queen, which really should be titled How to Fuck Up Your Kids' Ego Structure When They're at Their Most Vulnerable. The big question posed in this paper, as quoted from the authors, what might Drag Queen Story Hour offer educators as a way of bringing queer ways of knowing and being into the education of young children? The authors attempt to make a case for drag pedagogy, which they say is a theory of education rooted in drag. As we read and understand what's written in the paper, we learn that the drag queen in the classroom acts as a queer proselytizer, inviting children to explore the queen's personal life and to provoke such questions as, "Why are you dressed like that? You're a man. Why are you wearing a dress?" The queen may answer, "Why can't a man wear a dress? Who said that a man wearing a dress is wrong? If you like a dress, you can wear one too." As the paper states, within the context of Drag Queen Story Hour, the visual style of the queen serves as a provocation that invites inquiry into normative fashion and embodiment. In other words, Drag Queen Story Hour is the epitome of grooming. Why? Because a child's exposure to the drag queen opens the door to having a deeper conversation about queerness. Once the door is open at that age, it cannot be closed. Drag Queen Story Hour promotes queerness as a way of being in the world. And remember, Queer is an identity without an essence, a fluid anti-identity that cannot and will not anchor to a point of stabilization. They want your kids nebulous and moldable so your kids can carry this Marxist revolution on their backs. The left is actively sexually grooming and sexually objectifying your kids in their government schools, and as you will learn in the next video, Groomer Schools 5, the grooming happens under the guise of SEL, or social emotional learning. We are seeing in real time the formation of a queer red guard, and that's the point. So I'll leave you with this quote from James Lindsay. If you knew that you were sending your kids to a Maoist thought reform school for 35 hours a week, what would you do differently? Because you are.